Welcome to Twilight Terror Stories. Twilight is not just the end of day, it's the beginning of something else. A time when the shadows stretch and fear takes its first breath. You've stepped into that moment now, and the stories are waiting. Let them find you. Nightfall in Willow Creek Preserve doesn't just bring darkness. It stretches the shadows into predatory shapes. My flashlight's beam sliced the manufactured gloom as I navigated the familiar circuit. Yet an unfamiliar dissonance hummed beneath the quiet. Perhaps it was the wind, sighing through sculpted junipers like a lament, or the sodium lamps painting the vacant driveways with a sickly, jaundiced light. Then perception sharpened. A silhouette, hooded and still, staked out near the Pendleton residence. The ordinary patrol evaporated. Tonight held teeth. 6 months I'd walked these manicured pathways, a sentinel in paradise. Willow Creek Preserve, enclave of the city's gilded elite, bought peace of mind at a premium. My role? Mostly a battle against soporific silence, a vigil kept against boredom, until this particular rotation under this specific moon. The hooded shape materialized around 11, a statue carved from nightfall opposite Arthur Pendleton's ostentatious abode. Initially, I dismissed it. A resident lingering, perhaps stealing a furtive smoke before retreating indoors. But minutes bled into hours. The figure rooted, an unwavering sentinel of its own. 2 a.m. arrived, heavy with implication. My radio crackled to life. "Dev, you catching this observer on the Pendleton feed?" Static spit back before Dev's voice materialized, tinny and distant. "Affirmative. Been painting the screen for a while. Unsettling, yeah? Want me to escalate?" Hesitation coiled in my gut. False alarms were ghosts that haunted these grounds, phantom intruders conjured by nervous wealth, inevitably resolving into late-night deliveries or nocturnal groundskeepers. Crying wolf felt like a greater transgression than caution. Negative. I'll make the approach. Keep eyes glued to the monitors, all right? Roger that, Silas. Watch yourself. I moved with deliberate quiet, my boots whispering on the asphalt, one hand instinctively hovering near the canister of deterrent clipped to my belt. Closer now, details swam into focus. Tall frame, undeniably male, swathed in dark fabric, the hood drawn so low it swallowed any hint of features. An unsettling stillness clung to him, head cocked slightly, an attitude of intense listening. "Excuse me," I projected, aiming for the crisp timbre of authority. "This is private property. Is there something I can assist you with?" Slowly, deliberately, the figure pivoted. The void beneath the hood remained absolute, a black hole where a face should be. Ice traced a path down my vertebrae. I forced my throat clear. "Sir, I need you to state your purpose or vacate the premises immediately." Silence stretched, taut and humming. Then, a voice like stones grinding together scraped the air. "I'm waiting." My grip tightened on the spray. Waiting? For whom? He shifted his attention back to the imposing facade of the Pendleton house. For his return. Internal claxons blared. Arthur Pendleton, I knew, kept erratic hours, but this vigil felt predatory, charged with intent. "Listen," I said, hazarding a step forward. "I don't know you, or your business with Mr. Pendleton, but loitering isn't permitted. Let's walk down to the security post. Clear this up properly." The figure remained immutable. Departure is not an option, not until completion. A visceral chill flooded my veins. Completion of what? No response came, only the unnerving tableau, the watcher and the watched house, locked in silent confrontation. I retreated, a measured withdrawal that broke into a clipped stride back towards my vehicle. Inside, the radio felt heavier. "Dev, make the call. Police," my voice betraying a slight tremor, "and pull everything on Arthur Pendleton, fast." While Dev relayed the alert, the resident database bloomed on my console screen. Arthur Pendleton, 45, solitary occupant, profession listed as financial strategist. Clean record within the preserve, no complaints, no disturbances. Until a footnote snagged my attention, dated 6 months prior, coinciding almost exactly with my hiring. Resident requests assessment for enhanced security protocols. Justification withheld. Fragments clicked into place. Pendleton's perpetual air of tightly wound tension, his exaggerated startled response to sudden noises, the bristling array of new cameras studding his property's perimeter. It wasn't simple paranoia. It was fear given tangible form. Lost in deduction, I nearly missed the soft crunch of tires on asphalt. Headlights swept the lane, illuminating the scene as a luxury sedan swung into the Pendleton driveway. A lead weight dropped in my stomach. Arthur was home. I watched him emerge, clutching a briefcase, weary movements under the porch light. He was halfway to his door when his gaze snagged on the hooded watcher. He froze, his face instantly bleached of color. My car door slammed as I sprinted across the intervening lawn. "Mr. Pendleton, inside, get inside now." Pendleton needed no further prompting. He scrambled towards the entrance, keys rattling against the lock, but the watcher moved with astonishing speed, a blur erasing the distance, a hand clamping onto Pendleton's arm. I collided with them just as a briefcase tumbled, disgorging a blizzard of documents onto the pristine grass. Instinct took over. I launched myself at the hooded assailant, a tangle of limbs crashing onto the meticulously kept turf. Chaos erupted, grunts tearing fabric, the damp scent of crushed grass. A sharp sting raked my forearm. Then I was looking directly at the intruder's face, or rather, the stark negation of it. A mask, smooth and white, utterly featureless, seemed to absorb and reflect the dim light with an eerie luminescence. "Stop!" I gasped, grappling for purchase. "Police are en route." His strength was startling, inhuman. A violent surge sent me tumbling backward into the stiff embrace of Pendleton's ornamental shrubbery. By the time I untangled myself, blinking away disorientation, he had vanished, swallowed by the same shadows that birthed him. Pendleton was a crumpled heap on his doorstep, tremors racking his frame. "Gone?" he whispered, the word barely audible. "Yeah," I managed, breathless, helping him upright. He's gone. You okay? Injured? He shook his head, but his eyes remained wide, frantic. You don't get it, he rasped. He'll return. He always does. Before I could probe further, the night fractured with the approaching crescendo of sirens. Moments later, the tranquil street became a stage for flashing lights and clipped commands. Cruisers, paramedics, forensic technicians meticulously harvesting the scene. I recounted the encounter to a stern-faced detective, the description culminating with the mask. His eyes narrowed perceptibly. White mask? Blank, you said? I nodded. Completely. Why? Significant? The detective exhaled slowly, massaging his temples. Potentially. We've got a pattern developing over the last year. Assaults, B&Es, perp signature is a blank white mask. Targets are invariably affluent men in finance, like Mr. Pendleton. We haven't snagged him, haven't pinned down a motive. As the investigation unfolded, clarity emerged from the scattered papers. Not financial reports, but police documents, news clippings, all chronicle in the masked assailant's activities. Pendleton hadn't just been scared. He'd been hunting, trying to anticipate the next strike. Dawn began to bleed gray light into the sky as the official presence dwindled. I found Pendleton on his porch, a solitary figure contemplating the violated street. Mr. Pendleton, I began softly. If you can... Who is he? This vendetta? He remained silent for a long count. When he spoke, his voice was brittle, stripped bare. His identity? Unknown. The why? That I understand. He lifted his gaze, haunted pools reflecting the nascent light. A year ago, a catastrophic investment decision. My decision. People lost fortunes. Some lost everything. A trembling hand raked through his disheveled hair. First, just angry calls, veiled threats. Then the violence began. Always men like me, advisors, bankers, always the man in the white mask. Why not involve the police more directly? I asked. A humorless laugh escaped him. I tried. No concrete link back to me, they said. And, truthfully, he paused, shame coloring his tone. A part of me felt complicit, like this was penance. Words failed me. The rising sun cast long, accusing fingers across the immaculate lawns of Willow Creek Preserve, rendering the night's horrors stark and surreal. What's your next move? Pendleton rose, attempting to smooth his ruined suit. Uncertain. But the running stops. This existence, ruled by fear, it ends. He turned, a flicker of resolve hardening his features. I will find him. Conclude this, one way or another. Watching him retreat into the sanctuary of his home, I felt a profound certainty. This was merely an intermission. The blank remained coiled in the darkness, patient, and intuition screamed he wouldn't rest until his grim ledger was balanced. In the ensuing days, Willow Creek Preserve transformed. Security presence tripled. Patrol cars became commonplace fixtures. Yet, each night, traversing my route, I scanned the periphery, half expecting the chilling gleam of that vacant white mask. The familiar quiet now felt suffocating, pregnant with menace, Every rustle in the meticulously landscaped foliage became a potential harbinger. The residents, once cocooned in oblivious privilege, now scurried from car to door, eyes darting, shoulders hunched. And I continued my watch, waiting, because his return was not a question of if, but when. And the next time, readiness would be my only shield. The shadows run deep in Willow Creek Preserve, I'd learned, but the most terrifying secrets often reside behind polished veneers and flawless gardens. Sometimes the true monsters aren't phantoms in the night, but the consequences we invite through our own doors, blind to the devastation they trail in their wake. The dawn I stumbled upon the capacity to unspool time began as any other unremarkable rotation of the earth. Yet it culminated with me, trembling, cradling a god's prerogative. Autumn air, sharp as fractured glass, bit at the morning. Late again, a familiar refrain. My hurried transit down the city's teeming pavement, thermos clutched in one hand, portfolio in the other, left me blind to the insidious slick of black ice until gravity claimed me. One instant, vertical. The next, a dizzying descent. My coffee painting a languid mocha arc against the sky. Eyes clamped shut, anticipating the jarring kiss of concrete, I felt a cessation. Stillness descended. The world hung, a frozen tableau, trapped within a singular, crystalline moment. Then, unbelievably, the reel reversed. My own form unscrambled, snapping upright. The errant coffee leapt obediently back into its container. I found myself planted firmly, several paces shy of the treacherous patch. As the city's rhythm surged back to life, I stood rooted, a statue of bewilderment, mind grappling with the impossible playback, a phantom of stress, a wakened dream. Yet there it lay, the ice, exactly as remembered. This time, cautiously, I navigated around it, thoughts skittering like startled birds. Work unfolded in a haze, my body executing rote tasks while my consciousness wrestled with the morning's anomaly. What sorcery was this? How had I summoned it? The crucial query echoed. Could the feat be replicated? Lunchtime yielded the unsettling answer. In the sterile hum of the break room, coaxing warmth into a forlorn container of greens via the microwave, Corbin from finance made his entrance. Corbin, suffice it to say, he occupied a space far removed from my affections. Boisterous, grating, prone to remarks that curdled the air round the office's women. He ambled toward the refrigerator, his voice booming. "Ilara, quite the vision today. That skirt certainly advertises the inventory, wouldn't you say?" A flush, hot and furious, bloomed across my cheeks. Before reason could intervene, the words tore free, sharp and ragged. "Silence yourself, Corbin. Your pronouncements are vulgar and utterly unwelcome." The room plunged into abrupt quiet. Corbin's features twisted, a mask of affronted rage. "Who in blazes do you imagine you're addressing, you little—" And it unfurled anew. The world locked, then spun backward. I watched, transfixed, as his venomous syllables retreated into his throat, as his form reversed its path, exiting the break room in reverse stride. Time snapped taut, resuming its forward march. I stood alone again, beside the humming microwave. When Corbin reappeared moments later, I was prepared. Snatching my salad, I slipped out before his gaze could even snag on me, the confrontation neatly excised. Through the afternoon's waning hours, I probed the contours of this nascent capability. Concentration, a fierce act of will, these were the keys. I learned I could rewind the immediate past, up to perhaps 5 minutes worth. The sensation was a dizzying cocktail of euphoria and dread. Minor fumbles erased, awkward social collisions sidestepped, even a moment of seeming prescience before my supervisor, flagging a flaw in the latest project before it surfaced. But the walk home that evening carried a new density. The true measure of this power began to settle, a leaden weight in my gut. The ability to mend the immediate past, to nullify errors, to undo harm, to subtly reshape the tapestry of the present. A force potent enough for immense good or profound corruption. Weeks bled into one another, shadowed by the ethical labyrinth of my secret. I deployed the rewind sparingly, reserving it for trivialities, rescuing a dropped mug from shattering, evading the path of a belligerent pedestrian, catching a precariously balanced file before its descent. Yet a persistent unease lingered, a whisper that I ought to aim higher. Then arrived the day that fractured everything. Homeward bound, adrift in contemplation, the shriek of tortured rubber split the air. My head snapped up. A vehicle, wildly out of control, mounted the curb, hurtling toward a cluster of schoolchildren awaiting their transport. Instinctively, desperately, I reached for the rewind, clawing at the fabric of time to avert the unfolding horror. Nothing. The world remained stubbornly linear. Time refused its backward course. I could only watch, paralyzed as metal met fragile flesh. The ensuing minutes dissolved into a cacophony of screams, wailing sirens, raw chaos. When the dust began to clear, the grim tally emerged. 2 young lives extinguished, others broken. And I, the woman who could manipulate moments, had stood by, utterly impotent. Guilt and a gnawing confusion consumed the following days. Why had the power failed precisely when it mattered most? Was it capricious? Or was the universe delivering a brutal lesson in immutable fate? An obsession took root. To map the boundaries of this strange gift, I tested it relentlessly, pushing against its invisible constraints. Intense emotional states, I discovered, acted as static, interfering with the signal. The greater my panic or distress, the more elusive the rewind became. I also learned that temporal distance demanded a commensurate energetic price. Reversing a full 5 minutes left me drained, limbs heavy, barely upright. Amidst these revelations, the burden of responsibility intensified. Each temporal adjustment, however minor, sent ripples outward, potentially altering destinies in ways I could never foresee. Was it my place to play architect with reality, even on a small scale? Sleep offered little refuge, haunted by visions of averted disasters juxtaposed with nightmares of unraveling existence itself through careless intervention. The crucible arrived roughly a month after the power's genesis. Seeking solace on a rare day off, I sat in a bustling coffee shop, the aroma of roasted beans thick in the air. Nursing a latte, observing the urban ballet, I inadvertently tuned into the hushed, urgent tones from the adjacent table. A man, hunched over his phone, murmured, "Affirmative. It's primed. The device is secure. The instant the mayor commences his address, detonation. Pandemonium." Ice water cascaded through my veins. A bomb? An act of terror unfolded in coded whispers? My gaze shot to my watch. The mayor's speech at City Hall was slated for less than an hour from now. Indecision seized me. Alert the authorities? But the potential for disbelief, the ticking clock. Then, the certainty. I possess the means to stop this, to rewind, to erase the plot before its conception. Yet, 5 minutes felt woefully inadequate. This required a leap far beyond my previous excursions. Drawing a ragged breath, I marshaled every shred of focus, every particle of will, pouring it into the command to reverse. The cafe blurred, reality spooling backward at a nauseating velocity. I pushed, teeth clenched against the mountain strain, the world dissolving into streaks of light and sound. 15 minutes, 20, 30. Just as the pressure threatened to fracture my resolve, the scene snapped back into sharp focus. I stood outside the coffee shop, the time on my phone confirming a rollback of nearly 45 minutes. No hesitation, I dialed emergency services. "A bomb," I choked out, the words tumbling over each other. "City Hall, the mayor's speech. Intercept immediately." The subsequent hour stretched into an eternity. Heart hammering against my ribs, I watched from afar as a swarm of police descended upon City Hall. The news confirmed it later. An explosive device, nestled within a decorative planter near the podium, disarmed. The architect of the plot apprehended while attempting to melt into the ensuing confusion. That evening, watching the televised reports of the averted catastrophe, a strange amalgam of profound relief and stark terror washed over me. Lives spared, yes, but the cost. The extended rewind had exacted a harsh physical toll. A deep ache resonated in every muscle. A persistent, throbbing headache pulsed behind my eyes. Deeper still was the psychic tremor, the sheer scale of my intervention. I hadn't merely sidestepped an awkward moment. I had fundamentally rerouted the river of events, altered history. The implications were vast, chilling. In the ensuing days, as the city thrummed with talk of the foiled plot, clarity emerged from the internal storm. This power could not be ignored, nor wielded lightly. Boundaries were essential. A vow formed. Reserve its use for dire emergencies, for moments when life itself hung in the balance. No trivial gains, no manipulation of personal affairs. And always, always weigh the potential downstream consequences. Years have passed since that pivotal day in the coffee shop. The power has been called upon, albeit sparingly. A near-fatal collision averted, a street robbery interrupted, once granting a dying soul precious moments for farewells. Each instance carries the familiar weight of responsibility, the chilling awareness of tampering with the natural progression. Yet, I've come to perceive this ability not just as a burden, but as a profound, improbable gift. A chance to inject mercy into the merciless machinery of fate. It is no simple existence, harboring this secret, navigating these impossible choices. But witnessing the ripples of averted tragedy, knowing the lives untouched by darkness because of a moment rewound, affirms the path. Why this power manifested in me, or how long it will remain, are questions without answers. But, for the duration granted, for as long as I can momentarily halt the relentless march of seconds, I will strive for wisdom, for purpose. For ultimately, that is the universal task, to make the most of the time allotted, whether we command its flow or are merely carried along by its current. The city bled neon onto the slick asphalt that night, rain falling not in drops but in silver, slashing curtains that turned the familiar streets into an opalescent dreamscape. I, Alara, navigated this watery world from behind the wheel, a veteran of a year navigating the currents of rideshare anonymity. It funded existence, offered fleeting glimpses into other lives, or so the narrative I clung to went, before this particular Friday unraveled it completely. October clung damply to the air, the kind of evening that felt perpetually on the edge of something. Hours blurred into a montage of tipsy students and drained commuters, their fares punctuating the rhythmic sweep of the wipers. Exhaustion beckoned. A siren called to end the shift, but my phone chimed, insistent, offering one last fare. The pickup point pulsed on the map, the city's frayed edge near the skeletal remains of an industrial park, a precarious zone, yet the surge multiplier shimmered temptingly. What harm lurked in one final trip? A dangerous question I'd soon learn. Pulling curbside, I saw him, a lone shape huddled beneath the sickly orange halo of a failing street lamp. Tall, spare, draped in a dark hoodie that shadowed his face into anonymity. A canvas duffel hung from one shoulder. A tremor, primal and insistent, urged me to hit the gas, to melt back into the rain-streaked anonymity. But a flicker of misplaced empathy stayed my hand. The memory of snap judgments, of assumptions based on mere surfaces. Who was I to deny him passage? The locks clicked open. He folded himself into the back, bringing the scent of wet pavement and an undercurrent I couldn't name, something metallic and unsettling. "Appreciate the stop," his voice emerged, a low rumble like stones shifting underwater. "Not everyone ventures out this way." A smile, thin and forced, stretched my lips as I met his gaze in the rearview mirror. Dark eyes, unnervingly direct, held mine for a beat too long, sending a ripple of cold down my spine. "No worries," I managed, aiming for nonchalance. "Destination?" He recited an address an hour distant, deep into the rural hinterlands far beyond my usual orbit. The potential earnings warred with the unease tightening in my chest. I keyed the coordinates into the GPS, the synthetic voice a frail counterpoint to the drum and rain as we pulled away. Silence descended, thick and expectant, broken only by the metronomic wipers and the downpour's percussive symphony on the car roof. I felt his gaze, a tangible pressure on the back of my neck, observing. Desperate to puncture the tension, I ventured, "So, what takes you so far out on a night like this?" The quiet stretched, taut, and long, until I wondered if he'd even registered the question. When he finally spoke, his words were shards of ice slipped into my bloodstream. "Running," he stated flatly, "from something significant." My grip tightened on the wheel, knuckles blanching. "Oh?" The sound escaped me, small and reedy. Like... He leaned forward, his proximity sudden, his breath warm against my ear. "The law," he whispered, the word laden with a chilling intimacy. "Did something irreversible. They're close." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat I was certain he could hear. Calm, I coached myself. Stay calm. What exactly did you do?" He leaned back, amusement coloring his tone now, a terrifying dissonance. "Why don't you find a spot to pull over? I could demonstrate." Every nerve ending shrieked, "Drive! Faster! Flee!" But the highway unfurled before us, a deserted ribbon flanked by dense, dripping woods. No sanctuary, no escape route. I don't think that's wise," I stammered, the words catching in my throat. "Perhaps I should just continue to your destination." His hand clamped onto my shoulder, fingers digging in with surprising force. The pressure was absolute. "Pull. Over. Now." Numbly, I obeyed, easing the car onto the sodden, muddy shoulder. The moment the wheels stopped spinning, he was out, a blur of motion circling to my side. My fingers scrabbled uselessly at the door lock, but he was quicker, wrenching it open, hauling me out into the deluge. I stumbled, landing hard on my knees in the cold mire. Looking up, I saw him looming above, the rain plastering his hoodie to his frame, and in his hand the wicked gleam of a knife blade catching the distant headlights. "Please," the word tore from me, a ragged blend of rain and tears. "Don't. You don't have to." He crouched, the knife hovering near my cheek, its cold promise radiating inches from my skin. "Ah, but I do," he murmured, the tone almost gentle, a horrifying paradox. "Can't abide witnesses, you understand, and you, my dear Alara, have seen entirely too much." I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the searing pain. Instead, a sound utterly alien to the moment broke the tension. Laughter. Deep, unrestrained belly laughs that convulsed his frame. Disbelief warred with terror. Then, impossibly, he extended a hand and helped me to my feet. "Gods," he gasped, wiping actual tears from his eyes. "Your face. Absolutely priceless." I stared, mind reeling, struggling to bridge the chasm between mortal terror and this bizarre anticlimax. What is happening? He beamed, the menace evaporating like mist. "It's for the channel, sweetheart. My viewers are gonna eat this up. See?" He tapped a small, discreet camera lens clipped to his hoodie. "You just got seriously pranked." A tidal wave of relief crashed over me, so potent it left me weak-kneed, immediately followed by a surge of white-hot fury. "Are you insane?" I yelled, shoving him backward with unexpected force. "You scared me to death. What is wrong with you?" His grin faltered, replaced by a flicker of petulance. "Hey, lighten up. It's comedy. People love this stuff." Before I could unleash the full storm of my outrage, a new sound sliced through the night. Sirens, faint but growing rapidly louder, closer. The color drained from his face. Damn, he muttered, eyes darting nervously down the highway. Someone must have seen us pull over, called it in. We gotta bounce. But something had shifted within me. The terror had forged a core of defiance. No, I stated, my voice ringing with newfound firmness. I'm staying right here. You can explain your comedy to them. His expression hardened, the easygoing mask crumbling to reveal something uglier beneath. I wasn't asking, he growled, lunging, his hand locking around my forearm like a vice. The menace was back, raw and terrifyingly real. This was no performance. I twisted, struggled against his superior strength as he began dragging me towards the car, his grip bruising. In that instant, pure survival instinct ignited. A forgotten self-defense lesson surfaced. Anything can be a weapon. My free hand found the car keys still clutched in my pocket. With a single, desperate motion, I swung them upward, the jagged metal tearing across his cheek. He roared, a sharp cry of pain and surprise, releasing me to clap a hand to his bleeding face. I didn't wait. I ran, down the slick highway towards the approaching sanctuary of flashing blue and red lights. His footsteps pounded behind me, heavy on the wet asphalt, but adrenaline lent wings to my feet. The police cruiser materialized out of the rain-swept darkness. I waved frantically, screaming, gasping for air and help. Tires squealed as the car braked sharply. 2 officers spilled out, weapons drawn. "Down on the ground," one commanded. I collapsed, chest heaving, heart threatening to explode. Behind me, sounds of a brief struggle, the sharp click of handcuffs. Gentle hands helped me up. Turning, trembling, I saw my assailant being forced into the back of the patrol car. His eyes met mine across the rain-streaked distance, filled with a venomous hatred that chilled me deeper than the rain. "Are you okay, ma'am?" an officer asked, wrapping a coarse blanket around my shivering shoulders. I nodded, the tremors racking my body now a delayed reaction. "Yes, I think so. Thank you." The ensuing hours were a blur of statements and lukewarm station coffee. The man, Silas, apparently had a documented history. His pranks often teetered on the edge of genuine assault. The duffel bag, investigators discovered, contained rope, duct tape, zip ties, tools not of comedy, but of captivity. His intentions had been anything but playful. Later, a detective approached me, his expression grave but kind. "Miss Vance," he said softly, "this was undoubtedly harrowing. But I need you to know, you likely prevented something far worse tonight. We've been trying to pin this individual down for months. He was escalating. Because of you, he's no longer a threat." His words offered little comfort then, drowned out by the echoing realization of how narrowly I'd escaped becoming a statistic, a forgotten headline. The days that followed were steeped in shadow. Getting behind the wheel became an exercise in hypervigilance. Every new fare felt like a potential threat lurking behind a polite facade. But slowly, painstakingly, aided by therapy and the unwavering support of loved ones, the light began to filter back in. I learned the crucial difference between trusting intuition and succumbing to prejudice. The vital importance of prioritizing safety over politeness. I never drove for that company again. The experience, however, wasn't wasted. It became fuel, channeled into advocacy for better protections, for listening to that inner voice that screams danger. I shared my story, hoping it might empower others to heed their own warnings. That rain-lashed night irrevocably altered the landscape of my life, yet it also unearthed a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. Caution is now my constant co-pilot, but I refuse to let fear take the wheel. Because for every Silas casting shadows, countless others walk in the light, and that truth remains, a stubborn ember glowing even on the darkest, most rain-soaked nights. My grasp on the tangible, once absolute, now feels spectral, eroded by this eyrie perched high among the silent peaks. Faith in my own eyes, my ears, the evidence of touch, these anchors dissolved the moment I stepped into the mountain house. The structure itself was plain-spoken, a low porch listing slightly to one side, a wide main room flanked by 2 sleeping chambers, a narrow stairwell coiling towards the upper floor. Its walls were stark, its floors planks worn lustrous by forgotten passage, its window frames weathered deep. Nothing in its architecture arrested the eye, yet its profound isolation promised the sanctuary my work craved. 20 minutes of deeply rutted track separated this place from the nearest sign of human life. Stillness I had sought. Stillness I believed I'd secured. How utterly wrong I was. The first day dissolved in the mundane rituals of arrival. Cardboard disgorging clothing, stacks of books, the essential laptop. Ornamentation felt alien here. I desired only sparseness. Window sashes groaned in protest but ultimately yielded to pressure. Taps hissed and spat before the water pump, rattling with a faint metallic tremor, delivered a stream sufficient for a bracing shower. Outside, I ambled beneath colossal evergreens whose boughs sighed and grated in the restless wind. The air, sharp against my cheeks, carried the loam-rich scent of damp earth. Behind the house, the ground fell away steeply, already pooling with premature shadows. Dusk bled into the corners of the rooms, finding me bone-weary from the day's exertions. Pasta, coaxed from a temperamental electric stove, one burner remaining stubbornly cold, constituted my solitary supper at the kitchen's unadorned wooden table. The profound emptiness of the house seemed to amplify every small sound, the scrape of fork on ceramic, the intimate mechanics of chewing and swallowing. Dishes were rinsed and stacked, hands wiped dry, a moment of absolute quiet descended. Then came a soft, yet definite impact from somewhere near the hallway that bridged the kitchen and the main living space. Not forceful, more like a small dense object meeting the floorboards. My initial thought, poorly stacked boxes, contents settling. Rising, I activated the main room light. Cartons huddled near a bookshelf, appearing stable, unmoved. A filament of cold air snaked from beneath the front door. The mountain night was beginning to assert its chill. I dismissed the sound. Nerves, I told myself, frayed by solitude and the unfamiliarity of the place. The front door secured with a decisive click of the bolt, the lower lights extinguished, I ascended the complaining staircase. Each tread emitted a distinct groan, magnified by the oppressive hush. In the designated bedroom, a small lamp cast a frail circle of light. My phone, displaying only a stark no service, lay inert on the bedside table. I made a mental note, hunt for a signal outdoors tomorrow. Leaving the bedroom door slightly ajar, I switched off the lamp and sought refuge beneath the blankets. Sleep, however, remained elusive. Sometime near midnight, a sound pulled me sharply from the edge of slumber. A low, grating friction just outside my door, insistent, like something coarse being dragged across the wooden floor. My heart leaped, hammering against my ribs. My mouth turned instantly dry. Holding my breath, I strained to hear more, every nerve taut. The scraping ceased. My gaze locked onto the dark aperture of the open doorway, the unlit hallway beyond a void. A palpable coolness seeped into the room. Goose flesh tightened the skin on my arms, the small hairs at my nape prickling upright. The impulse to reach for the lamp warred with a profound reluctance to illuminate whatever might wait beyond the threshold. A branch scraping the siding, I rationalized, a loose piece of guttering. Minutes stretched, measured by the frantic pulse in my ears. Finally, I slid from the bed, bare feet finding the cold floor. My hand skimmed the wall, found the switch. The hall light flickered once, twice, then held, bathing the narrow passage in stark illumination. It was empty. Bare boards, scuffed and scarred, but otherwise unremarkable. The guest room door was shut. The bathroom door stood open. Nothing. Returning to my room, sleep was a forgotten country. Dawn arrived not with rest, but with stiffness and a lingering film of unease. My eyes felt puffy, gritty. Downstairs, the ritual of coffee promised a fragile normalcy. The front door remained bolted. Through the window beside it, early sunlight touched the high ridges, throwing the dense viridian of the pines into sharp relief against a canvas of drifting cloud. I focused on these ordinary details, seeking equilibrium. Yet, as I crossed the main room, a new sound registered. A specific, localized creak from beneath the floorboards, one I hadn't noticed before. Old houses settle, I reminded myself, pushing the thought away. The day unfolded in a forced semblance of work, notes accumulating on the laptop screen at the kitchen table. My hearing, however, remained preternaturally sharp, snagging on the whisper of wind through the evergreens, the intermittent hum of the refrigerator cycling on. By late afternoon, some of the internal tension had eased. Perhaps, I mused, my imagination had simply run wild in the unfamiliar darkness. But as the light began to fade, drawing long shadows across the floor, an undeniable heaviness returned, settling in my chest. The prospect of nightfall filled me with a creeping, formless anxiety I couldn't logically dissect. Restlessness took hold. I found myself pacing the ground floor, compulsively checking window latches, testing the door locks again, flicking light switches on and off as if to ward off the encroaching dark. With the sun's final disappearance behind the western peaks, I declared war on shadow, banishing it with electric brilliance. Overhead, lights glared in the kitchen, the main room, the hallway. Lamps were strategically positioned, driving gloom from every corner. I conducted a slow patrol, room by room, flinging open closet doors, yanking back the shower curtain, a meticulous, futile inspection aimed at proving the house's emptiness. All vacant. Back at the kitchen table, a half-eaten sandwich sat accusingly, my stomach too knotted to accept more. Then it started, a sharp, staccato rapping against the main room window pane. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Irregular, yet possessed of a disturbing deliberateness. My breath caught, my chest tightened. Rising swiftly, heart pounding a frantic rhythm, I stared towards the source. The tapping persisted for a few more seconds, then abruptly stopped. Rounding the corner into the main room, I approached the window. The lamp's reflection stared back from the darkened glass, obscuring the night outside. Leaning closer, I scanned the immediate exterior. No branches close enough to touch the glass, nothing that could account for that particular rhythm. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My breathing grew shallow, rapid. The wind? A large insect? A lost bird? The explanations felt flimsy, unsatisfying. Slipping out the front door, the beam of my phone's flashlight cutting a nervous swathe through the darkness, I circled the house. The night air was frigid, the silence profound, watchful. Beside the window in question, nothing. No stray twig, no displaced object. Only empty ground and the looming presence of the trees. A sharp sense of vulnerability prickled my skin. I retreated hastily indoors, the sound of the bolt sliding home unnaturally loud. Sleep was now an impossibility. I brewed more coffee. In one specific corner of the kitchen, a single bar of cellular service flickered into existence on my phone. A message from Maya. "Settling in, okay?" My thumbs, clumsy and trembling, typed a brief, reassuring lie. All fine. Setting the phone aside, I watched steam rise from the mug, the heavy thrum of my own pulse the only sound in the waiting silence. Around 10 o'clock, the quiet was broken again. From the hallway, footfalls, eerily soft, lighter than an adult's tread, moving slowly, deliberately along the corridor floor. Every muscle in my body tensed. Goose flesh rippled across my skin again. Holding my breath, I rose from the chair and crept to the main room's entrance. The footsteps halted. Peering cautiously around the doorframe, I saw only the brightly lit, empty passageway. Then, a faint, dry rustling, like stiff fabric brushing against wood, yet with no visible source. My skin crawled. Eyes straining, watering slightly from the effort, I detected something else. A subtle distortion in the air at the far end of the hall, near the base of the stairs. Not smoke, not quite shadow, but a shimmering, translucent anomaly, like heat haze rising from summer pavement. It seemed to waver, to pulse with a slow, internal rhythm, swaying slightly. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. I tried to speak, but my throat felt tight, constricted. "Hello?" The word emerged as a cracked whisper. The shimmering distortion flickered erratically for a heartbeat, then simply dissolved, leaving the hallway starkly empty once more. I stood frozen, pulse thundering in my ears, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. What had I just witnessed? A primal urge to flee surged through me, yet my feet felt rooted to the floor. This place was mine. Answers, however terrifying, lay within these walls. Ascending the stairs again, I flicked on the upper hall light, calling out once more into the unresponsive stillness. Silence reigned. The treads groaned their familiar complaint under my weight. At the landing, the upper corridor stretched vacant. Both bedroom doors stood open. The guest room, sparsely furnished with only stacked cartons, appeared undisturbed. My phone's light probed the corners. Nothing. Yet the fine hairs on my arms lifted, sensing an unseen charge in the air. I pulled the guest room door shut and retreated into my own bedroom. Sinking onto the edge of the mattress, I struggled to catch my breath, thoughts chaotic and terrifying. Denial felt impossible now, The hallway mirage had been too distinct, something intangible, yet possessing presence, movement, sound. What could it mean? My chest felt tight, banded. As I rubbed my stinging eyes, a whisper materialized directly behind me. Soft, sibilant, a single, elongated syllable, unintelligible but undeniably present. I leapt up, spinning around. Empty air. The space near the foot of the bed felt unnaturally cold. My heart battered my ribs like a trapped bird. Backing away, I stumbled into the hall, slamming my bedroom door shut behind me, leaning against the wood, legs trembling uncontrollably. A plan, however desperate, began to surface. This presence, this entity, seemed to be seeking acknowledgement. Perhaps calmness, observation, was the only way forward. Descending the stairs once more, legs shaky, palms leaving damp prints on the banister, I found the lower level still defiantly illuminated. Kitchen, main room, hallway, all blazed with light. I returned to the kitchen table, a sentinel waiting in a brightly lit fortress. My stomach churned. The image of the hallway apparition seared behind my eyes. An hour passed in relative quiet, punctuated only by the house's familiar nocturnal sighs. A fragile sense of control began to return, only to be shattered when the overhead kitchen light flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. It steadied, but the jolt of adrenaline was sharp. Almost simultaneously, another muted impact sounded from the main room, softer this time, like a padded fist gently striking wood. Rising yet again, I moved into the living area. The lamp cast its unwavering glow on the sofa, the small coffee table. Nothing seemed out of place until my gaze landed on the small door set into the wall beneath the staircase. Earlier, I was certain I had closed it firmly. Now, it stood ajar by several inches. Heart rate accelerating, I approached, my damp fingers closing around the cool metal of the knob. Pulling the door open, I swept the cone of my phone's light into the cramped space. Shelves held cleaning supplies, some empty boxes. One carton lay on its side on the floor, clearly having been moved. Kneeling, I saw it was empty. From behind the remaining boxes, a faint, papery scrabbling sound reached my ears. The light revealed nothing. As I straightened, my peripheral vision caught movement, reflected in the large mirror hanging on the opposite wall. A shape, not my own reflection. Something dark and low near the end of the sofa, behind where I stood. I whipped around, flashlight beam stabbing the air. The sofa was untenanted. My breath came in harsh, ragged gasps. For a fleeting second, I had perceived a distinct, hunched, human-like contour. Fear stung my eyes, constricted my chest. I stood frozen, listening with painful intensity. Utter silence enveloped the room. Then, undeniably, a cool draft of air brushed past my left shoulder, stirring the fine hairs on my neck. It was a gentle, almost deliberate displacement of the air. My pulse surged violently. I spun again, light slashing wildly through the empty space. Nothing. My mouth felt like parchment. Adrenaline sang a high, thin note in my ears. Words felt like the last resort, the only weapon left. What do you want? The question, ripped from my throat, sounded thin and shaky in the charged atmosphere. My hands trembled. Speaking to the empty air felt profoundly foolish, yet utterly necessary. Seconds stretched into an eternity of silence. Then, from the hallway floor came a faint, dry, scratching sound. My stomach plummeted. Drawn towards it, I walked slowly, deliberately, each footstep echoing the frantic beat in my chest. Near the entrance to the corridor, I saw them. faint, shallow lines scored into the wood finish. They looked utterly fresh. Kneeling, I traced their path with a fingertip. Superficial, yes, but undeniably new. A deep, bone-penetrating chill radiated through my arms. Something made these marks. Standing, I peered down the length of the corridor. My mouth felt tacky. I forced myself to breathe slowly, rhythmically, battling a rising tide of panic. The very quality of the air seemed altered here. Denser, heavier, pressing in. I clenched my fists, seeking an anchor in the physical sensation. My heartbeat was a deafening drum against my ribs. And then I saw it, coalescing out of the illuminated air before me. Not solid, not transparent, but an outline, tall and unnervingly thin, vaguely anthropomorphic. It possessed a subtle internal motion, swaying gently from side to side with a disturbing, almost hypnotic rhythm. The urge to turn and run screamed through my nervous system, but my feet felt welded to the floorboards. I stared, transfixed, my throat tight, mind racing with unformed questions. I forced one shaky step forward. The silhouette reacted instantly, gliding backward, then flowed sideways, seeming to momentarily adhere to the wall before continuing its retreat. The corridor lights flickered, pulsed. My hand felt cold, clammy. A shuddering breath escaped my lips. It didn't feel overtly threatening, more directive. As if compelled by an unseen force, I followed its silent guidance, step by hesitant step, until it led me to the very foot of the staircase. And there, as suddenly as it had appeared, it dissolved into nothingness. I stood trembling, one hand half raised towards the empty space, sensing an unspoken imperative. A soft, distinct knock echoed from upstairs, somewhere on the second floor. My own intuition urged me upward. Go. I climbed the stairs again, legs feeling weak and unreliable beneath me, the treads groaning their usual lament. The upper hall light remained steady. My attention fixed on the guest room door, the one I had deliberately closed. A faint, shuffling sound whispered from within. My palm, slick with sweat, closed around the doorknob. Pushing the door inward, I was met with disarray. The cartons I had left neatly arranged were now scattered haphazardly across the room. One lay overturned. Its contents, the blank sheets of paper I'd intended for notes, spilled across the floorboards. But they weren't merely scattered. They formed a clear, deliberate circle in the center of the room. My body went rigid. Then my eye caught it. A single sheet, partially trapped beneath the corner of an upright box. Retrieving it, my hand shook uncontrollably. Crude, jagged lines covered its surface. Not letters, not any symbols I could recognize, yet imbued with a stark intentionality, like some primal, desperate attempt at communication. My scalp prickled with intense cold. Whirling around, the conviction of being observed almost suffocating me, I found only empty space. Yet the presence felt more tangible than ever. Doubt was no longer a luxury I could afford. Something was undeniably here. Something that made noises, left physical traces, manipulated objects, and now, it seemed, was attempting to communicate. Rational thought screamed for flight, for a desperate retreat to the world of predictable reality. But leaving now felt like a betrayal, an abandonment of a question that had taken root deep within me. The remainder of the night was spent downstairs, a sleepless vigil keeper huddled in the aggressively lit living room. Sleep offered only brief, fitful snatches, shattered by every creak of settling wood every flicker of a bulb. My body ached with exhaustion. My nerves felt scraped raw. Now, as dawn paints the eastern peaks in washes of pale rose and gray, I sit amidst the wreckage of my certainties. Denial is impossible. The sounds, the fleeting apparitions, the chilling marks on floor and paper, they are irrefutable. This presence is real, a palpable weight in the air around me. My heart still kicks erratically when I recall the swaying silhouette in the hallway. Its motives remain shrouded, but its desire for my attention feels undeniable. Is there more it intends to show me? Fear is a cold, hard knot deep inside, yet strangely intertwined with it is a growing, insistent compulsion to understand. My senses are abraded, my mind weary, but I will not leave. Not yet. I came to this remote place seeking solitude, seeking inspiration. I have found something altogether different. Tonight, I will remain. Tonight, I will watch and wait. A profound stillness claimed me the instant those stifled lamentations reached my ears, emanating from the sealed chamber down the corridor. Elsewhere, my home breathed its usual, quiet rhythm. The galley kitchen lay submerged in darkness. The sitting room offered only silence, and the passage lamp hummed its familiar, low-frequency drone. Yet, that evening, a low, guttural strain pulsed from behind that particular door, raising the fine hairs along my forearm like startled sentinels. Months had passed since I'd last ventured near that space. It served no purpose in my life. I simply kept it secured, a void I chose to disregard. But those sounds, insistent and sorrowful, frayed my composure. Retrieving my keys, I felt compelled to investigate. That was the night the chair materialized, planted squarely in the room's center, an object I possessed absolute certainty I had never introduced into that barren space. Now, merely traversing that threshold triggers an involuntary, subcutaneous chill. Occasionally, the chair seems pivoted towards the door as if occupied by an unseen watcher, patiently anticipating my arrival. Allow me to unravel the sequence, event by painstaking event, to illuminate the genesis of this persistent disquiet. This dwelling became mine several years prior, compact, possessing 2 sleeping quarters, a functional kitchen, and a modest sitting area. Working remotely at times, I'd envisioned the spare room as a dedicated office. Upon settling in, however, the ambition waned. An indefinable quality within its atmosphere repelled me. Stark white walls met cheap, tiled flooring beneath a solitary window gazing streetward. Each entry plunged me into a palpable coldness. Initially, I left its door ajar, but the sheer pointlessness of the room eventually led me to lock it away. The spare key relegated to a kitchen drawer forgotten until that pivotal night. It was nearing the 11th hour. I was immersed in some inconsequential television program in the sitting room when a muted percussion began. A dull thudding, so faint I initially attributed it to the house's old plumbing or perhaps the movements of a neighbor. But the sound warped, transforming into something akin to muffled weeping, a low moaning that seemed choked back. I silenced the television, listening intently. Unmistakably, it originated from the hallway. My senses strained, pulse accelerating. I tried to dismiss it. Anomalous pipe noises surely. But the sound persisted, erupting in brief, stifled bursts, like utterances forced through dense fabric. Rising, I moved with deliberate slowness towards the corridor. The door to the spare chamber remained shut, precisely as I always left it. As I drew nearer, the moaning intensified slightly. A wave of icy dread washed through my chest. My hand closed on the knob. It was securely locked. A flicker of absurdity struck me. Of course, it was locked. I always ensured it was. I hesitated, wrestling with the possibility of auditory hallucination. Then, determination hardening, I hurried back to the galley, rummaged through the designated drawer until my fingers closed around the cool metal of the key. Returning to the door, I inhaled sharply and inserted the key into the lock. It yielded with unnerving smoothness. The muffled sounds continued, faint now, yet undeniably present. Pushing the door inward revealed nothing but absolute darkness. It appeared as vacant as ever, a mere rectangle of shadow. Yet, the instant the door opened, the moaning ceased abruptly. My chest constricted. Fumbling along the wall, my fingers found the light switch. It clicked, and the overhead fixture sputtered, then bloomed into weak illumination. The room was stark, empty, save for a single wooden chair positioned directly in its epicenter. It was utterly commonplace. 4 legs, a simple, flat back. And I knew, with unshakable conviction, that I had never placed a chair or any furniture whatsoever within those 4 walls. Nevertheless, there it stood. I remained frozen in the doorway, gaze fixed upon the inexplicable chair, bracing for whatever might follow. My heart hammered against my ribs, my breathing ragged, but the room itself held a profound silence. No moans, no creaks, no phantom footsteps. Cautiously, as though fearful of disturbing the unseen source of the earlier sounds, I stepped across the threshold. The tile felt frigid beneath my socked feet. I circled the chair, scrutinizing it for any clue, any anomaly. It seemed ordinary. Minor scratches marred the seat, the edges showed signs of wear, nothing remarkable. My fingers brushed the wooden back. It was smooth but startlingly cold. My gaze darted to the window, locked firmly from the inside. The entire room had been secured from the exterior. No one could have simply entered and deposited a chair. The logic crumbled. Yet the certainty remained. I had not put it there. A maelstrom of confusion and nascent terror churned within me. My stomach twisted. I retreated backward out of the room, eyes still locked on the chair. I extinguished the light, pulled the door shut. My hands trembled as I turned the key, locking it once more. Sleep offered little refuge that night, my mind relentlessly replaying the image of the chair, haunted by the memory of those sounds, though the house remained stubbornly silent. The following morning, I attempted to rationalize. Perhaps I had placed the chair there at some forgotten juncture, a lapse in memory. The thought felt foolish, yet I clung to it, trying to banish the unease. Days slipped by, the nights remained quiet, but an invisible barrier seemed to emanate from that door. Whenever I passed, the ambient temperature plummeted. The corridor, typically warmed by the afternoon sun striking that side of the house, felt like stepping into refrigerated air near the spare room. Goose flesh prickled my arms, compelling me to hasten my steps. Then, one morning, preparing for errands, an irresistible urge drew me to check. Keys in hand, heart thudding erratically, I stood before the door, uncertain if I truly wished to breach its boundary again. I needed confirmation, I told myself. Was the chair still present, or had my mind fabricated the entire episode? Unlocking the door, I swung it open, flicked on the light. The chair remained, but its orientation had shifted. It was now angled slightly, as if turned to face the doorway more directly. The change was subtle, yet undeniable. It seemed poised, aimed at me. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and fled the house, my hands shaken as I secured the front entrance. My thoughts raced, grappling for explanations that dissolved upon examination. Perhaps its alignment had been slightly off before, and I'd simply failed to notice. But a deeper instinct insisted otherwise. It felt deliberately moved, positioned by an occupant facing the door. I drove aimlessly, completed my tasks, consciously suppressing thoughts of the chair. But the image resurfaced intermittently, tightening the muscles in my neck. Returning later that day, around 3 p.m, sunlight streaming through the sitting room window bolstered my resolve. Daylight felt safer. I strode to the spare room door, unlocked it, activated the overhead light. The chair sat immobile in the room's center, still angled towards the entrance. Nothing else seemed amiss. The window remained locked. The corners were devoid of shadows. No footprints marred the floor tiles. Everything appeared undisturbed, pristine. Yet the sensation of being observed prickled insistently at the nape of my neck. My stomach churned. I locked the door once more and retreated to the sitting room, forcing myself to breathe evenly. I began actively circumventing that section of the house. I'd catch myself casting furtive glances towards the door, half expecting it to swing open of its own accord. Nightfall brought a ritual of securing every window, every door. Faint noises occasionally surfaced, but I attributed them firmly to aging pipes or the wind's passage. Some nights, anxiety propelled me from bed to recheck the locks, a silent admission of how deeply rattled I'd become. My body existed in a state of constant low-grade tension. Roughly a week later, a new disturbance occurred. Lying in bed, caught in sleep, I heard a distinct thump from the hallway. Sharp, solitary, like something dropped onto the floorboards. My heart leapt, a frantic bird in my chest. I rolled onto my side, eyes fixed on my bedroom door. Reluctance warred with the inability to ignore it. Slipping from bed, I crept into the passage. The spare room door was closed. Tentatively, I placed my hand on the knob. It felt unnaturally cold, colder than the surrounding air. I turned it. The lock clicked, secured just as I'd left it. Pressing my ear to the wood yielded nothing. No moans, no thumps, absolute silence. Eventually, I returned to bed, mind spinning uselessly. The next morning, I decided to contact Reese, a friend known for his pragmatic, level-headed nature. I recounted the strange noises, the inexplicable chair I couldn't recall placing in the spare room. He chuckled, suggesting I was likely overthinking things. I insisted he come see for himself. He arrived that afternoon. I led him directly to the door, unlocked it. The chair was there, but now it appeared perfectly centered again, facing straight ahead, back in its original position. Reese stood in the doorway, arms crossed, one eyebrow skeptically arched. He entered, circled the chair, inspected the window, rapped on the walls, even briefly sat upon it. He perceived nothing unusual. "Mate, he said, clapping my shoulder. "It's just a chair. Maybe the previous owner left it? You probably just forgot." Frustration simmered beneath my surface. I knew something was fundamentally wrong, but I offered no rebuttal. I allowed him his inspection, then we retreated. He stayed for a beer, conversation drifting to mundane topics. As dusk settled, he departed, leaving me once more alone. His visit had provided a fleeting sense of normalcy, but it evaporated the moment I passed that door again in the encroaching darkness. The familiar rush of cold air greeted me. I resolved to ignore it. Days later, however, a mix of annoyance and exhaustion from the persistent fear drove me back to the door. I inserted the key, but the lock resisted, stiff and uncooperative, unusual for its typically smooth mechanism. With extra effort, it finally turned. I pushed the door open, flicked the switch. My breath caught. The chair was now turned completely around, its back facing the door, gazing towards the far wall. A visceral crawl traced its path up my spine. The air hung heavy, stale, and the prickling sensation returned to the back of my neck. Stepping inside, I reached for the chair, intending to reposition it. My palms felt clammy. The instant my hands made contact, a jolt of intense cold shot through me, as if the wood had been stored in a deep freeze. I recoiled instinctively, then forced myself to grasp it again. I dragged it, scraping loudly across the tiles, closer to the window, merely to alter its position, to assert some control. I exited the room, locked the door, and began pacing the sitting room, heart pounding, thoughts fragmented. Anger warred with profound fear. The possibility of an intruder, however illogical, spurred me to action. I meticulously checked every window latch, every door bolt, every conceivable point of entry. All secure. I even ventured into the attic, finding only dust motes dancing in the dim light. Empty. Descending the stairs, the house felt ordinary, mundane, except for the palpable wrongness radiating from that sealed chamber. That night, I decided on a vigil. I settled onto the floor in the hallway directly outside the spare room door, plunging the passage into darkness, and simply listened. My back grew stiff, my legs cramped, but I remained, staring at the faint outline of the door in the gloom. The house settled into a profound quiet, punctuated only by the distant hum of the refrigerator. An hour passed in uneventful silence before I conceded defeat. Nothing. But as I pushed myself upright, preparing to leave, I registered a faint, soft scrape from the other side of the door, the distinct sound of chair legs moving across tile. I froze, hand pressed against the wall for balance, breath held captive in my lungs. The urge to unlock the door, to confront whatever lay beyond, warred with a paralyzing dread. I chose retreat, fleeing to my bedroom, closing the door firmly behind me, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Over the subsequent week, I studiously avoided opening that door. Yet, each passage provoked the same blast of frigid air, raising goose flesh despite my resolve. Concentration became a luxury. Phone conversations with friends felt strained, my preoccupation with the house a heavy, unspoken weight between us. Sleep brought disturbing dreams, finding myself seated in that very chair within the dark room, staring intently at my own bedroom door. I'd awaken abruptly, drenched in sweat, the clock invariably displaying the spectral hours around 3 a.m. finally, one morning, saturated with fear and frustration, I resolved to act. In the full light of day, I would open that door, physically remove the chair from the room, and observe the consequences. A surge of determination propelled me forward, though my chest remained taut with apprehension. It was just a room, I chanted internally, just a piece of furniture. I unlocked the door, flicked on the light. The chair faced the door again, but it was closer now, significantly closer than before. It seemed to have edged forward, diminishing the space between itself and the threshold. I stood rooted, hand clenched around the doorknob, limbs feeling leaden. An unexpected sting of tears blurred my vision, a cocktail of frayed nerves and sheer exasperation. Forcing myself forward, I gripped the chair's top rail and pulled it backward towards the hallway. The harsh scrape of wood against tile echoed unnervingly in the vacant room. My heart pounded violently. I dragged it out into the corridor, leaning it against the wall there. I stared at it for a long moment, half expecting an invisible force to snatch it back inside. Nothing stirred. Releasing a ragged breath, I glanced back into the room. Empty. Utterly empty. No furniture, no boxes, no shadows playing tricks. Leaving the door ajar, I turned back towards the sitting room. I had taken perhaps half a dozen steps when the cold returned, washing over my back like an icy wave. I spun around. The door to the spare room slammed shut with violent finality. I flinched, a choked gasp escaping me. My hands flew up, shaken uncontrollably. The chair remained in the hallway, leaning innocently against the wall. It wasn't the chair. I took a hesitant step towards the now closed door, hand outstretched, but found myself incapable of touching the knob again. My mouth was desert dry, my legs trembling beneath me. And so, things remain. The chair resides in the hallway now, a silent, displaced sentinel against the wall. I have not attempted to open that door again. The pervasive cold still greets me whenever I pass. Sometimes, late at night, I fancy I hear a muffled sound, a faint echo of the original lament, but I refuse to investigate. The tension is a permanent resident in my chest. My mind replays the moment of discovery, the chair in the darkness, inexplicable, impossible within a locked room. Logically, I should gather my belongings and abandon this house, yet an invisible tether holds me fast. This is my home, or it was meant to be. I cannot divine what lies behind that door without breaching it once more, a prospect I currently lack the courage to face. All I know is that the room was intrinsically wrong from the very beginning. I repeat the mantra, it's just an empty space, a single window, nothing more. But the cold is undeniably real. The sounds were real, and the chair's migrations were real. It defies comprehension, and perhaps comprehension is not what I truly seek. For now, avoidance is my strategy. I confine myself to the other parts of the house, sleeping under the glare of lamps, merely trying to endure, to remain calm until the sanctuary of morning arrives. Perhaps, one day, fortitude will find me, and I will remove that door from its hinges entirely. But until then, I live alongside the unknown, separated only by a thin panel of wood. The instant the armchair migrated across the parlor floor of its own volition, I understood this house-sitting arrangement would be far from the tranquil retreat I'd envisioned. What began as a simple courtesy for my neighbor rapidly decayed into a harrowing waltz with inscrutable forces, fraying the edges of my sanity, compelling me to grapple for the very essence of my being. My name is Ilara. Until last month, I navigated the urban sprawl like any other 25-year-old, piecing together a living. When Mrs. Holloway, the elderly woman next door, inquired if I might oversee her residence while she visited kin for a week, the offer felt like deliverance. A quiet spell within a magnificent Victorian edifice, a respite from my clamorous flatmates. Paradise beckoned. Had I but glimpsed the shadows coiled behind those elegantly carved walls. The initial day unfolded without incident. I wandered the labyrinthine rooms, lost in admiration of the antique furnishings and the filigree of the woodwork. Mrs. Holloway had provided meticulous notes regarding her botanical charges and the feeding schedule for her cat, Jasper. Everything appeared deceptively simple. It commenced the second night. As I readied myself for sleep, a distinct thud resonated from downstairs. Assuming Jasper had precipitated some minor catastrophe, I descended to investigate. Upon reaching the living room threshold, however, I froze. The ponderous mahogany table, an inert behemoth previously anchored in the room's heart, now stood flush against the distant wall. Not merely shifted, but transported entirely to the opposite side. Impossible, I breathed, eyes scanning the polished floor for drag marks, searching the shadows for Jasper. Nothing. No evidence of transit, no feline culprit. Rationalizations flickered. Exhaustion, faulty memory perhaps? I strained, shoving the heavy piece back towards its presumed origin, retreating upstairs burdened by a cloying dread settling deep in my stomach. By morning, I'd nearly convinced myself it was a wakened dream. Yet, descending for coffee, a fresh discordance greeted me. The portraits lining the hallway hung askew, each tilted at a bizarre, deliberate angle. My pulse quickened. I knew with unshakable certainty they had hung perfectly straight the previous day. I'd even remarked to Mrs. Holloway on the house's impeccable order. As my trembling hands righted the frames, another anomaly snagged my attention. In a corner of the living room, previously occupied by unadorned plaster, stood a door. Diminutive, almost scaled for a child, its surface was a riot of intricate, unsettling carvings. I approached with trepidation, curiosity dueling a profound sense of wrongness. Reaching for the knob, I could have sworn whispers slithered from the other side, faint yet undeniably present. My hand recoiled as if seared. This defied logic. Doors do not simply materialize. Closing my eyes, I inhaled deeply, counting slowly to 10. Upon opening them, the wall was blank once more. The door had vanished. The remainder of the day passed in a state of hypervigilance, each groan of the old timbers, each settling sigh of the structure making me jump. Cleaning offered little distraction. An unwavering sensation of being observed followed me relentlessly. Eyes within the painted portrait seemed to track my movements, and fleeting shapes danced at the edge of my sight, dissolving the instant I turned. Sleep offered no refuge that night. Just as consciousness softened, jolts of sound, furtive footsteps in the corridor, the phantom brush of something against my skin, snapped me back to terrified awareness. Dawn found me frayed, Exhausted, I resolved to call Mrs. Holloway to confess the escalating strangeness and withdraw from the final days. Yet, as I recounted the itinerant furniture, the spectral door, she merely chuckled. "Oh, that's merely the house breathing, dear," she offered lightly. "It has its little quirks, nothing to concern yourself with." But her tone held an undercurrent, a subtle note of amusement. A chilling suspicion bloomed. She knew far more than she admitted. As the week bled onward, the phenomena intensified. Books launched themselves from shelves as I passed. Pockets of inexplicable cold materialized in certain rooms, my breath pluming visibly in the sudden chill. And the whispers, they became a constant susurration, a sibilant chorus just beyond the threshold of understanding. Then came the symbols, peculiar, arcane sigils manifesting upon the walls, etched into the floorboards beneath the rugs, shimmering briefly in mirror reflections. They seemed to writhe with latent energy when not directly observed. One sleepless night, driven by a desperate need for answers, I opened my laptop, delving into the property's lineage. The findings turned my blood to ice. Constructed in the late 19th century by one Silas Thorne, Mrs. Holloway's great-grandfather, the mansion was steeped in dark rumor. Thorne, local lore whispered, consorted with esoteric orders, hosting clandestine midnight assemblies where unsettling chants bled into the surrounding night. Legend claimed Silas had forged a pact, bartering souls for power and longevity, necessitating a periodic tribute. The accounts were hazy, yet over decades, numerous individuals had vanished without trace near the estate. As I absorbed these chilling narratives, the whispers encircling me swelled, growing insistent, demanding. I slammed the laptop shut, heart hammering against my ribs. This had to be delusion, an elaborate hoax, or perhaps a stress-induced fracture of my own mind. Yet a deeper certainty resonated within. The occurrences in this house were terrifyingly real, exceeding the scope of any nightmare. The following day, the small door reappeared, this time in my bedroom. And this time, it stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, a swirling vortex of absolute darkness pulsed, shot through with glimmers of incandescent, unearthly light. The whispers pouring forth were clearer now, seductive, promising dominion, enlightenment, the fulfillment of unspoken desires. If only I would cross the threshold. Transfixed, I felt an almost gravitational pull toward the opening. Surrender seemed seductively simple. Just then, a soft meow broke the silence. Jasper sat at my feet, gazing up with wide amber eyes. The moment shattered the enchantment. Scooping the cat into my arms, I fled, running blindly, not pausing until the house was a distant silhouette down the street. I spent the remaining days holed up in a sterile motel room, venturing back only for Jasper's essential care. Each return plunged me deeper into the house's palpable wrongness. The sigils blazed more boldly on the walls, the whispers crescendoed, the very air seemed thick and thrumming with a hostile vitality. When Mrs. Holloway returned, I waited on the porch, steeling myself for confrontation, for answers. But one look into her face dissolved my resolve. Her eyes mirrored the same unnatural luminescence I'd glimpsed within the impossible void beyond the door. "Did you find your stay agreeable, dear?" she inquired, her smile stretched unnervingly wide. "The house appears to have developed quite an affinity for you." I mumbled a nonsensical excuse and bolted, my legs trembling too violently to properly function. Glancing in my rearview mirror as I sped away, I caught a final image of Mrs. Holloway standing on the porch. For a fleeting, horrifying instant, her familiar form seemed to waver, ripple, revealing something ancient and profoundly dreadful beneath the grandmotherly facade. A month has passed. I inhabit a new apartment in a city far removed, yet the disquietude lingers, an indelible stain. Occasionally, in the dead of night, the whispers return, echoing from the deepest shadows of my room. And sometimes, behind closed eyelids, I see it, the small, intricately carved door, patiently waiting. What lies beyond it, I cannot fathom, nor do I comprehend a bargain Mrs. Holloway, if that name holds any truth, struck for her unnerving vitality. But this much I know with chilling certainty. Some doors are best left unopened. Some thresholds exist only to be shunned. Because once you have peered into that abyss, once you have heard the darkness sing its siren song, it never truly releases its grip. And somewhere, within a beautiful Victorian mansion pregnant with secrets, a small door waits patiently for someone sufficiently curious, or perhaps sufficiently desperate, to turn the knob once more. I pray fervently that someone is never again. A shriek of tortured metal ripped through the silence, the skeletal Ferris wheel shuddering into motion. The gondola I'd sought refuge in lurched upwards, and a cold certainty washed over me. I hadn't thrown the switch. Someone else haunted these decaying grounds, and they knew precisely where I cowered. Reese, that's the name on my time card. 6 months I've walked these spectral pathways as night watchman for the husk of Dreamland Park. It's solitary work, garden ghosts and rust, but the quiet desolation held a certain ruined poetry. Faded paint peeling like sunburnt skin, rides frozen mid-breath, the air thick with forgotten laughter. Usually, my adversaries were hormonal teenagers chasing urban legends. Tonight, the legend chased me. The shift began as dusk bled into the sky, a watercolor wash of bruised purples and fading orange. I took the keys from the dayman, exchanged the usual pleasantries, and settled into the familiar solitude. The initial hours unfolded with predictable quietude. My boots crunched on gravel paths as I completed the first circuit, flashlight beams sweeping across padlocked gates and boarded-up concession stands. All secure, all silent, until midnight struck. During my second patrol, a tremor at the edge of sight, a disturbance in the geometry of shadows near the old ghost train, snagged my attention. I snapped my head around, the cone of light stabbing into the darkness. Nothing. Only the gaunt silhouettes of dormant rides against the bruised sky. Just the wind sighing through rusted steel, I told myself. Just rats feasting on phantom popcorn. Yet, the prickling sensation on my neck intensified, the undeniable weight of unseen eyes. As I pushed deeper into the park's heart, the unease solidified into a palpable dread. Every elongated shadow seemed poised to detach itself from the ground. Each groan of settling timber tightened the knot in my stomach. My pace quickened instinctively, my hand finding the reassuring weight of the taser holstered at my side. Near the skeletal remains of the carousel, its painted horses frozen in mid-gallop, I heard it. Sharp, brittle laughter, like shattering glass, echoed off the warped funhouse mirrors. It ricocheted through the dead air. I spun, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Identify yourself." My voice, intended as a command, frayed into a ragged plea. "This is restricted property." Only the echo answered. Then another peal of laughter, closer this time, from the direction of the tilt-a-whirl. They were playing, a cruel game of hide-and-seek in this sprawling graveyard of joy. My radio hissed static, a dead frequency mocking my attempt to call for backup. My phone displayed only stark finality, no service. Isolation pressed in, absolute and suffocating. Against every instinct screaming retreat, I moved towards the sound. My flashlight beam danced nervously, illuminating peeling paint and forgotten refuse. The laughter, intermittent and taunting, drew me onward, past the derelict skee-ball alley, towards the colossal, brooding shape of the sky-high wheel. And there, bathed in the unsteady beam of my light, was the confirmation of my fear. The control box for the Ferris wheel yawned open, a nest of severed wires spilling like metallic entrails. Tampered with, deliberately. Before the implication could fully crystallize, the rustle of footsteps sounded directly behind me. I whirled, flashlight cutting empty space, but the sound persisted, multiplied, seeming to emanate from everywhere at once, a stealthy convergence in the dark. Panic, cold and sharp, surged through my veins. I bolted, scrambling for the nearest cover, an open gondola on the Ferris wheel itself. I tumbled inside, folding myself small against the cold metal floor, holding my breath, listening. The footsteps drew nearer, a tightening cordon, then ceased. Silence descended, broken only by the frantic thrumming in my ears. Then the world tilted. The Ferris wheel groaned, bucked, and began its inexorable climb. Raw terror seized me as the gondola ascended. Whoever stalked these grounds knew my hiding place. They weren't just intruders. They were puppeteers, and I was their marionette dangling on a wire. At the apex of the rotation, the machinery ground to a jarring halt, leaving me suspended, exposed beneath the indifferent stars. From this unwanted perch, the park spread below like a dark tapestry. Figures flitted through the shadows, not one, but several, fanning out, methodically sealing off any potential escape. My thoughts raced, frantic and fragmented. Who were they? What purpose did they have in this derelict place? Fragments of recent oddities surfaced, missing tools, strange noises echoing on previous shifts, inexplicable power surges. Had it all been orchestrated, leading to this moment? A voice, electronically distorted yet chillingly familiar, boomed from hidden speakers. "Enjoying the panorama, Reese? A special engagement, just for you." I knew that voice despite the metallic overlay. Kale. Day shift Kale. The disconnect was jarring. "Kale! What in God's name is this?" I yelled back, fighting to keep the tremor from my words. "What's going on?" A wave of mocking laughter washed up from below. "Oh, Reese!" Cale's amplified voice dripped with false commiseration. "You're truly in the dark, aren't you? Thought this was just some forgotten playground? That your job was chasing off kids looking for cheap thrills?" My mind struggled to connect the dots. "This park," Cale continued, his tone hardening, "it sits on something lucrative, something powerful people want kept quiet. And you, Reese, you've been the unwitting watchdog, scaring off anyone who might stumble onto our little enterprise." The pieces slammed into place with sickening clarity. The clandestine late-night deliveries, the cordoned-off zones deemed structurally unsound that I was warned away from. Dreamland Park wasn't just abandoned, it was a facade, a cover for illicit activity. Narcotics, contraband. The specifics didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd seen the men behind the curtain, and my life expectancy had just plummeted. Now, Cale's voice resonated with sadistic glee. A simple bullet would be efficient, but terribly dull. We've arranged a bit of sport for you, Reese. Survive our games, and perhaps there's a place for you. Fail. Well, tragic accidents are practically Dreamland's specialty, wouldn't you agree? The Ferris wheel groaned once more, beginning its descent. As the gondola neared the ground, I didn't wait. I launched myself out, landing hard, knees buckling but absorbing the shock. Immediately, the sounds of pursuit erupted, pounding footsteps, cruel laughter echoing through the skeletal structures. They were coming. What followed blurred into a nightmare marathon. Dreamland became a meticulously crafted death trap. The carousel horses spun into a blur and frenzy as I darted past, their painted eyes seeming to track me. The Mad Mouse coaster roared to life, its cars hurtling inches from where I dove for cover. Tripwires sang taut in the darkness, promising embraces with jagged metal shards. I stumbled into the Hall of Reflections, a kaleidoscopic hell where my own panicked face multiplied alongside the distorted grins of my hunters, reality and illusion bleeding together. But they hadn't factored in my intimacy with this place. 6 months of solitary nocturnal rounds had etched every shortcut, every shadowed alcove, every crumbling service tunnel into my muscle memory. I exploited this knowledge, weaving through the decaying labyrinth, doubling back, using the park's own dilapidated infrastructure to confound them. As the hours bled away, their taunts grew ragged, laced with frustration. Their traps became more desperate, less calculated. I managed to turn their own malice back on them, luring one pursuer into a concealed pitfall intended for me. And then, finally, blessedly, the oppressive blackness began to thin. Dawn bled gray at the eastern horizon. The perimeter fence loomed, a final barrier of corroded chain link. My pursuers were closing, Kyle's curses sharp on the morning air. Raw adrenaline fueled my ascent, rust flaking under my bleeding hands. I tumbled onto the dew-slicked grass outside just as they slammed against the wire mesh. Cale's face, a mask of fury framed by the diamonds of the fence, was my last glimpse of Dreamland. Stumbling towards the distant ribbon of highway, I must have resembled something feral. Torn clothes, wild eyes, smeared with grime and terror. The first car, driven by a startled elderly couple, hesitated, then screeched to a halt, perhaps swayed by the sheer desperation etched onto my face. They didn't ask many questions, driving me directly to the nearest police precinct. The aftermath was a maelstrom: depositions, federal agents, flashing cameras. The truth unraveled. Dreamland Park had served as a major hub for a sophisticated smuggling ring. Cale and his associates were apprehended, along with corrupted officials implicated in the operation. I was lauded, offered medals, positions. Yet, beneath the accolades, the psychic scar remained. The memory of that night, the transformation of a mundane job into a primal struggle for survival, lingered. Now, I advise on security protocols, designing systems to thwart the kind of clandestine operations that festered in Dreamland. But sleep offers little respite. Sometimes I'm back in that gondola, suspended high above the deadly playground, the distorted laughter echoing in the dark. I often wonder, had the sun delayed its arrival, would I have seen another dawn? One truth remains immutable. I can never again view an amusement park's cheerful facade without seeing the potential for darkness lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for nightfall, waiting for the games to begin. The first time my fingers trace the sigils, I dismiss them. Incisions in old timber, perhaps adolescent vandalism, perhaps the hieroglyphs of decay etched by wind and time into the barn's weary frame. Yet, feeling the rough geometry beneath my skin, a peculiar coldness, distinct from the autumn air, seeped into my bones. These were no random gouges, patterns coiled there, intricate, imbued with an unnerving deliberateness. A primal tremor resonated deep within me, a silent conviction. They were an admonition, one we were already failing to comprehend. My name is Ilara. This is a chronicle of how my family's yearning for renewal curdled into a waking dread. It commenced 3 months prior, when my husband, Julian, secured a position in a quiet town nestled far from the city's frantic pulse. Years of urban existence had worn us thin, drowning us in a tide of debt and ceaseless anxiety. The chance to relocate, to breathe air uncluttered by exhaust and expectation, felt like deliverance. We seized it. Our children, Cora and Finn, voiced predictable dismay at abandoning their familiar world. But we painted the move as a grand exploration, a new chapter waiting to be written. The farmhouse we secured possessed the allure of age. Weathered, yes, but radiating character. Heavy ceiling timbers like ancient bones, a veranda that embraced the structure, and land rolling away into hazy distances. Requires a dedicated hand, the agent had chirped, a euphemism for profound neglect we readily accepted. Julian and I craved the challenge, the tangible act of restoration. The initial weeks blurred into a montage of unpacked crates, the scent of fresh paint, and the discovery of our sprawling domain. The children's initial resistance dissolved. They surrendered to the freedom of open fields and climbable trees. Julian immersed himself in the rhythms of repair, while I coaxed life from the soil, planting rows of future vegetables. It felt, for a fleeting, luminous moment, as if we were finally sculpting the existence we'd long envisioned. Then came the dissonances, subtle at first, easily rationalized, yet accumulating like dust in forgotten corners. Nightfall brought the house alive in ways unsettlingly distinct from mere settling. When silence ought to have reigned, The walls would murmur, faint crepitations, hushed groans that seemed less like timber adjusting and more like presence. Julian, ever the pragmatist, attributed it to the building's vintage. I clung to his logic, though the sounds felt intentional, like furtive footfalls or whispers snagged just beyond auditory reach. Then manifested the pockets of unnatural cold. Certain zones within the house would plunge into frigid stillness, irrespective of the day's warmth. Passing through them was like traversing an invisible membrane into a pocket of ice. The children began instinctively circumnavigating these spots, murmuring about the odd feeling they provoked. But the barn held a particular gravity. It stood apart from the house, a stoic gray sentinel against the sky. We'd initially neglected it, prioritizing the dwelling's habitability. One afternoon, however, with the children claimed by school and Julian by his new job, curiosity drew me towards it. The heavy door protested with a resonant groan, disturbing motes that danced like tiny sprites in the blades of sunlight piercing the gloom. An aroma of desiccated hay mingled with something else, a subterranean dampness, vaguely unpleasant and unplaceable. And there they were, the symbols, carved not just into the primary support beams but scored into the wall planks, even crudely traced in the packed earth of the floor. Once perceived, they proliferated, an occult rash upon the structure, interlocking circles, jagged lines, forms suggesting a forgotten angular script. Hours dissolved as I moved through the barn's dusty twilight, captivated, trying to decipher their silent language. The sound of Julian's approaching car startled me back to the present. The sun bled orange through the cracks, and a dull ache throbbed behind my eyes. I retreated quickly to the house, unwilling to articulate the strange obsession that had consumed my day. That night, the house's murmurs escalated into a more defined chorus. Sleep eluded me. Above, in the attic space, I heard it distinctly, the cadence of pacing footsteps, back and forth, back and forth. Beside me, Julian slept, blessedly unaware of the sonic intrusions fraying my sanity. Morning found me resolved to share my discoveries, the barn, the sigils. But, as the words formed, Cora burst into the kitchen, her small face streaked with tears. "Mama, Papa," she choked out, "something's in my room." A shared, anxious glance passed between Julian and me as we hurried upstairs. Cora's room appeared untouched, bathed in morning light. Then I saw it. Scored into the fresh lavender paint above her bed, applied only the week before, resided one of the barn's cryptic emblems. Julian, baffled, questioned Cora, asking if she'd made the mark herself. But I knew. A cold certainty settled over me. This was not an end, but an initiation. The subsequent weeks saw a relentless escalation. The symbols manifested throughout the house like a creeping fungus. Beneath overturned rugs, concealed behind picture frames, even gouged into the flesh of ripening tomatoes in my garden. The nocturnal sounds amplified, becoming undeniable to us all. Susurrations that slithered from the walls, the distinct tread of unseen feet in unoccupied rooms, and sometimes, deep in the night, a rhythmic, guttural chanting drifting from the direction of the barn. Finn developed a disturbing somnambulism, a behavior entirely new. We'd discover him curled in shadowed corners or standing transfixed before blank walls, whispering fragmented syllables in a tongue we couldn't place. Cora grew inward, her sketchbook filling with obsessive, intricate reproductions of the symbols. Julian fought against the encroaching dread with logic. He summoned pest control for the noises, electricians for the anomalous cold, even consulted a child therapist regarding the children's behavior. Yet, beneath his determined rationalizations, I sensed a flicker of the same fear that gripped me, a tacit acknowledgement that we were confronting something beyond the purview of mundane explanations. It culminated on a tempestuous October night. Wind shrieked around the eaves, driving rain against the glass like frantic fists. We huddled in the living room, the forced gaiety of a board game, a flimsy shield against the storm's fury, when, with an abrupt finality, every light extinguished. Plunged into profound darkness, I heard Cora's whimper, Finn's sharp intake of breath. Julian fumbled for his phone, its screen casting an inadequate glow. "It's all right," he asserted, his voice taut with manufactured calm. "Fuse must have blown. I'll check the basement." The instant he departed, the whispering commenced. Not from one source, but from everywhere. The walls, the floorboards, seemingly condensing from the very air around us. An unknown language, yet its cadence resonated with pure, visceral menace. Cora screamed, her finger stabbing towards the window. There, starkly illuminated by a jagged fork of lightning, stood a figure. Tall, unnaturally slender, limbs elongated like stretched shadows. It faced us, and though its features remained indistinct in the strobing light, I felt its gaze, sensed an ancient, chilling amusement. In that instant, something within me fractured. Reason fled. I seized the children, propelling them towards the door, heedless of the gale and the lashing rain. We scrambled into the car, my hands trembling violently on the wheel as I ignited the engine. Julian burst from the house, shouting our names into the storm, but I didn't hesitate. I couldn't. A singular imperative governed me. Escape. Flee this house. Flee the malevolence that had taken root within its walls, within our lives. We drove into the black maw of the night, the children sobbing quietly in the back seat. I had no destination, only the imperative of distance. Dawn was painting the bruised sky with tentative strokes of light when I finally steered onto the shoulder of a deserted rest stop, my body vibrating with residual adrenaline and profound exhaustion. As I sat there, adrift, grappling with the enormity of what had occurred, my phone emitted a soft buzz. A message from Julian. "Where are you? Ilara? Are you okay? Please come home. We need to figure this out." Tears blurred my vision as I stared at the words. A part of me yearned to turn back, to confront the darkness alongside him. But the larger part, the part that had witnessed the figure silhouetted against the storm, that had felt the invasive chill of those whispers, knew retreat was impossible. "We're safe," I typed back, my fingers clumsy. "I'm sorry, Julian. We can't come back. Not now. Maybe never. I'll explain. I love you." Then, silencing the phone, I restarted the engine and merged back onto the highway. Our future was a terrifying blank. Where we were headed, what we would do, I had no answers. We were leaving behind more than just a farmhouse. We were abandoning a shadow that had nearly engulfed us, a riddle whose solution I increasingly feared. As the sun climbed, asserting its dominion over the receding night, My gaze snagged on my reflection in the rearview mirror. There, stark against the skin of my neck, just below the hairline, was a small, precise mark, one of the sigils from the barn. Ice flooded my veins. Whatever entity we had disturbed, whatever presence resided in that aged wood and tainted earth, it was not bound by place. It had imprinted itself upon us, laid claim in some manner I could not fathom. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator, the world outside dissolving into streaks of color. We were running, yes, propelled by terror, but a sickening certainty settled in my stomach. You cannot outrun that which travels within. Whatever awaited us down this unknown road, our lives were irrevocably altered. The sanctuary we sought had become a source of profound contamination, and all that remained was to endure what came next, together. The old farmhouse stands vacant now, I suppose, weathering the seasons alone. Yet, sometimes it surfaces in my dreams, vivid and watchful. And in those dreams, I know it isn't empty. It waits. It waits for the next hopeful souls seeking their own new beginning. And I am left to wonder, will they notice the signs? Will they heed the whispers before the silence breaks? Or will they, like us, recognize the truth only when it is far, far too late?